Hi all, in this video I will create a dynamic form from the JSON and I'm using Angular and PrimeNG for this one. I already set up a project with Angular and installed PrimeNG, PrimeIcons, PrimeFlex. Here you can see I already installed and imported in angular.json. So these files are already imported in the angular.json. The next step I have already done is I already, instead of calling a JSON, instead of calling or instead of getting a response from the API, I am just mocking up those API response in a JSON file and I am keeping it in the assets folder. In your case, it will be a API call and you will get the response from the API. Okay, but the implementation wise, it will be same. And also with the same data structure, I just created an interface. See, you can see the API response, I just created an interface data, and whatever the data coming inside this JSON, I just created. See, name, label, value, validators, and some places I have options as well. So those things I already added an interface. So let's get into the code. So in the HTML, I also added a PrimeNG card to look the design more good. Okay, just added a PrimeNG card also. So we will go to the app.module.ts first. So what we are going to do is, first we have to call an API to get the JSON to generate a form. Okay, so what you have to do is, in order to call an API in Angular, you have to import HTTP client module from the Angular common HTTP. Okay, so first you have to import that. So HTTP client module. So it is not auto importing, so I am just importing it manually. So it should be imported from at Angular /common/HTTP. So this is the first step for calling an API. The second step is you have to create an service file. Here doesn't have any service file. So let me create a service file using Angular CLI. For that, I am just adding Angular CLI command ng g for generate and s for service. Then I am just typing the service file name. Okay, so my service file name should be generated inside the app folder. Then app folder app.service.ts file needs to be generated. So you have to give nggs app. This is the service file name. If you click on the enter, if you press enter, it will be generate two files, app.service.ts and app.servicepec.ts. So it has been generated. Then go to app.service.ts and we will create a service or create a function to call the API. So in the constructor, you have to import private HTTP, some local variable, and you have to inject HTTP client. This also needs to be imported from Angular common HTTP. Let me try to auto import. Yes, it is importing automatically. So this is the another step. Then we will create a function called get form fields, and I am returning this dot http dot get, and I am calling. So in your case, you will have an API call. In my case, I doesn't have any API, so I am just taking that JSON file from the asset. So it's from asset slash, the file name will be form fields.json. So form fields.json. okay, and also I am just adding the return type as well, observable of I already created an interface. What is the API response? That I already created an interface. The API response will be the form field. So I'm just adding a form field here, and also I'm adding a form field here. Every place it throws error because we didn't import it. Just imported observable also. So once this has been completed, we can go to the app.component.ts. In the app.component.ts file, we can call the API and get the response from the API. So in order to inject the API service into the component.ts, first you have to add a constructor. In the constructor, you have to inject private, then app service, then our service we have created. So I'm just added. So this is how we will inject app service in the component.ts. Our next step is, on load itself we have to call the API and we have to get the response. Then only we can show the form in the HTML file, right? So the next step will be, in order to call the API in the on load itself, you have to implement ng on it, right? So implements on init. So this needs to be imported from the Angular core section. Once it has been implements, what you have to do, you have to write a function ng on it, and I will write a function this dot get dynamic form fields. I'm just writing a function here, and what I will do, I will call the service inside this function. So this dot app service dot get form fields, then you just subscribe it, and whatever the response you are getting, let me put in a bracket, then I can console it. So console.log of response. So adding the response, whatever the API response it is taking, I will import that also here, saving, and I will import form field also here. So first we can check whether the response is coming properly or not. Let me verify it is running or not. So it is already running in localhost 4200. So inspect console, you can see an object from the API. The API is getting called, and the data is coming. Inside the data we are getting an array of 4 elements. So first element is the text field, second element is the number field, and third element is the drop down, which are the options that also coming, and the last element will be the text area. Okay, so this is how we added. So we are getting all the form fields. So there are two things we have to be noted. The first thing is like we have to generate a form. The second thing is we have to use forms module. Okay, we have to use the forms module. We have to use the reactive forms module in order to do the binding. Okay, so those things we have. So two things is first one we have to generate the form. First, for that we will write a variable form fields. So form fields equal to an empty array, and what will be the form fields is, if you go to the interface, you can see the form field JSON. So I am taking the data from that. I am assigning form field.json. So this is the interface. Okay, then once I got the response from the API, so I will use this dot form fields equal to response dot data. Either you can do this way, or in the service file itself you can plug the data, and from the service itself you can pass the response directly instead of response to data. That is also fine. Now I am doing this way. Okay, So in the form fields we have the value. So if you want to implement a reactive forms module, first we want to build a form using a form builder, right? So for that we will create another variable called dynamic form, and you have to use a form builder. So I will inject a form builder here, private fb, then form builder. Okay, then here I will use this dot fb dot group, and I will initialize this variable with an empty object. Okay, so in order to use the reactive form, you have to import reactive forms module in the app.module.ts. So I will import reactive forms module from the Angular forms. So here you can see a dynamic form, and form fields contain all the form elements. Dynamic form contains the form builder, each variable. So normally before, if you are not doing the dynamically, how it will be like how we will display each value is like field 1 is the name of the field, then we will put an array and we will put an empty, that is the initial value of that particular field, then we will put a validators, right? Validators dot required. So validators also needs to be imported, right? So this is how we were doing. But if we are doing dynamically, we have to add this dynamically instead of statically writing here. Okay, so this is the part we are going to do right now. So in order to do those things, or binding each form fields into the dynamic field, what we will do is we will set it. Okay, so I'm just writing a function, this dot set dynamic form, and I am passing response state dot data to here, and I will create another function. If you want, you can write here itself, but cleaner way, better to separate that logic from the main function. So here you can call, these are the controls. Okay, controls. I'm just calling form field JSON array. Sorry, form fields array. I'm saving it, and what you have to do is I'm just taking each control, const control of controls. Okay, then I have to push it to this dynamic form from the API response, taking each field, and I am just manually dynamically creating this dynamic form. So this dot dynamic form dot, there is an option called add control to add each field name to the form. Okay, so first you have to add the field name. The field name will be the control dot name. The next one will be the value. So in order to add the value, you have to give this dot fp dot control, then you have to initialize it with an empty value. Okay, and the second parameter will be validators dot required, or validators dot min length, max length. Now in this case, I am not adding any validators right now. We can add it either on this at the end of this tutorial or the next tutorial. Okay, so first we will add this dot with an empty to initialize each field coming from the API. I will initialize with an empty value. Okay, so either you can put with an empty value. So instead of putting an empty value, what you can do is, if API is returning any other value, you can also add it. So I'm just putting a control dot value here. Okay, so the dynamic form has been generated. Now you can go to the component.html. We can create a form. So normally the reactive form, how it will be like, you have to add a form group, right? Form group, and form group is the reactive form. So what is the reactive form we are using? Its name is dynamic form. So dynamic form, and we are telling it as on ng submit we have to call this function. Then I am just writing a function save form, and I am using in the app.component.ts save form console.log of this dot dynamic form dot value. Value will returns each form value, okay, each field value. Next I am just putting no validate also. So basic form has been implemented. The next step is you have to add a button. So the button, since we are using the PrimeNG, we have to import the button from PrimeNG module. So button, go to the PrimeNG and you can add the PrimeNG button by importing the button module. So go to app.module.ts, import button module, and imports an import array, and use the same in the app.component. Either I can use the p button or you can use the button. So I'm just adding the label as submit, and I'm using type equal to submit. So make sure if you are using ng submit here, make sure the type should be submit. If you are not using ng submit here, you can use the type equal to button and on click in this p button itself, okay. So the basic steps has been completed. You have a submit button. Then you have to display each field from the API JSON, API response in the app.component.html. So how you can implement that? So all the form elements are available in the form field array, right? So we can add a for condition. So the basic, how to show a basic form is, in PrimeNG there will be a div, and that div, if you are giving a class called field, each field will be separated, okay. Then I am giving a class equal to field. Normally how it will be like, there will be a label, then there will be, if it is an input box PrimeNG. So how, if for example, how it will be like, this elements will be repeated for each element. This is how we are doing statically. But if it is in the dynamic case, what we can do, we can add a ng4 condition here. So I will add ng4 equal to let field of, and the field name will be form fields, right? Form fields, okay. So form fields, and the label you can give like field dot, if you click on the form field JSON, you can see the label, there is a label option, so you can give label, saving it, and instead of input I'm just showing field dot name. See, everything is coming. Then what you have to do next is you have to replace the field 1, field 2 with the corresponding input or text area, whatever it may be. You have to do that. So before doing that, let me add a class equal to block in order to make the label and the field name as a separate one, okay. So there will be now it is dynamically you have to create it. So you can see a text is there, number is there, drop down is there, and text area. So you can import all those elements inside the app.module.ts from the PrimeNG. So the first one is like input text, So in the app.module.ts, input text, then input number, then drop down, then text area. Okay. So all the things we have to be imported under the import section. Saving it, and let's go to the app.component.html. okay, so you have a label, and instead of field.name you have to add each field. So instead of, either you can put an ng if condition. So ng if any of the form type is drop down, just show the drop down. But now I am using an ng switch case. Okay, so in order to use that, you can use ng switch equal to, based on which field I have to show the field name. So it is the type, right? So field dot type, based on the type you have to show the below things. Okay, so first you have to show us, not really first, there is no such first, second and third, since it is a dynamic. Okay, so let me add the text area first. So text area, I am telling that if ng switch case equal to double quotes, inside double quotes you have to put a single quotes, then add, if the type is text area, then you have to show text area of PrimeNG, right? So that you have to give. Then next you have to give us form control name. So form control name equal to, in curly bracket, field dot, so what is a field is field dot name, you can give the name. Okay, so it will match this field dot name with this dynamic form field. So the dynamic form, we are adding control dot name, that is the field node name. So since it should match, okay, so it will match and it will check. So when you get into the code, you can see a text box is displayed. So field 5 means instead of label you can put some comments, whatever it may be, but from my JSON I have put the label as field 5. okay, so if it is putting a comment here, if the JSON changes automatically without any change in the UI, it will reflect soon. See, it will, so API only needs to be changed, based on the API response it will give the field name. Okay, so that is the power of dynamic forms. The next field you have to add is, maybe you can add input text. So input text will be, so here is the input text. So just add a ng switch case, that's all. ng switch case, text and the same form control name. Save it. See, it is coming. So if you want to add a placeholder, maybe from the backend API itself, the placeholder can be passed, and this placeholder or ID, whatever it may be, it can be added automatically. Okay, the next one is number, input number, sorry, instead of ng model, you have to give the form control name since we are using reactive form. Then then you have to give switch case equal to number. Then next one is drop down. So if it is drop down, I have to give ng switch case equal to drop down, and options will be, options is always, or either you can give the API reference, or now the options is should be passed from the backend API. So this is options. So I am just giving field dot options. So either you can put a square bracket or you can put equal to curly bracket. So here I put a square bracket, that's why I am not adding a curly bracket here. Okay, then instead of ng model, what you have to do is use the form control name. So option label, if since we are using a label and value, we don't need an option label, else we can add the option label. Okay, so if you go to the application, you can see it has been automatically. Okay, since we are using the drop down, we have to use the browser animations module, otherwise it won't work properly. You have to go to app.module.ts and you have to import browser animations module. I think it's not importing automatically, so I will import it manually. Import from at Angular / platform browser / animations. Okay, now you can see. Okay, if you want to add a placeholder, either you can pass it from the backend itself. If you are doing, you can add that way. Now for all the drop downs, I am just giving a placeholder select. So sorry, I think the submit button is on the top section. Let me add them to the bottom. I didn't notice that one. Okay, now you can see field 1, field 2, select drop down, and the comment section has been dynamically generated. So in future, if the form may contain the checkbox, radio button, everything the same way, you can add the fields and the options also. If it is a multiple options needs to be selected, you can also give the options accordingly. So this is how simply we can do a dynamic form. So here you can see, if you type any values, selecting label 1, and if you click on the submit, I already call a function called save form, right? So save form, what save form is doing, I am just consoling the value. So if you click on the submit, you can see all the fields I have filled have the updated value. So you can directly pass this value to the API without any change. So any number of fields can be added dynamically from the JSON. It will be automatically come here, and you can also submit. Okay, so this is how we will do a basic dynamic form validation with the help of Angular and PrimeNG. Next, we will have a look on it how we can add the validation also. Okay, so in order to add the validations, you have to check if first you can add a const validators equal to some array, and you can either add a switch condition or you can add if control dot, you can see here validators. Okay, so if the control dot validators, if validators is there, then if it is required, then the next value will be validators. So I can put an array, then you can put, sorry, instead of adding here directly itself, validators dot push validators dot required. First thing is, this validators need to be imported from the form builder. Okay, then you have to give validators here. Okay, the same way, if it is a min length, max length, you have to add the validations accordingly. And in the app.component.html, you can disable the button, disabled, if this form is invalid. So if the dynamic form dot invalid, then it should be disabled. So here I am using only validators required true, and one case it will be required false. So by default it will be disabled, and if you type, see, it is getting enabled. Okay, so this is how we will add the validations in the dynamic form with the default value and the validators. The next thing, we have to show a error in the HTML if it is not filled, right? So if that is the case, what you can do, you can at the bottom of the section, you can again add a small means to change the font size into the small, and you can add a PrimeNG class called block, and you can add p error. Okay, then you have to add a ng if condition. Ng if dynamic form dot get which field name, so it will be field dot name. Okay, any of the field have is invalid and done. So you can give a question mark here, otherwise it will throw error. And field name dot dirty, then you have to show an error message, common error message, like this is required. Saving it. Some error already came. The field does not exist on type app component. Let me see it. Okay, it's weird. Okay, why I got the issue, because we have added a div here and we have given a for loop here, right? So before closing that div, you have to use this one. Let me see now. Okay, then invalid is not there. So what you can do, you can again give a question mark here. So now you can see it's by default the submit button is disabled, and you can add fields, it's getting enabled. So this is not mandatory, but still I'm adding it, and I'm just removing it. See, this is required, or you can give this field is required. Field is required, then you are removing this field is required. It doesn't come required because once it has been selected we can clear it, right? So that is fine. So other fields it is showing required. So this is how we can do a validations. And if you want to add any other validations, you can add the if condition, and also if you want to add any custom validation also inside the if conditions based on the JSON. So the JSON should be appropriate to match with all the fields in the or the options in the reactive forms, or you have to manipulate accordingly based on the API response. So this is how we can do a dynamic forms, which is more simple when it comes to more form fields. So this is a very simple option to implement the dynamic forms in Angular project with the help of PrimeNG.